Brian, newly promoted to shift foreman, was thrilled about his night shift schedule, which let him attend his son's school events without compromising work. He took advantage of a few days off to work on a small apartment above his garage, creating a peaceful daytime retreat. He was also setting up internet access for the apartment by running a cable and installing an extender in the attic to strengthen the Wi-Fi signal from the house. While working, Brian heard unexpected noises from inside the house. Brenda was supposed to be at work, and their son Tim was visiting her parents, so no one should have been home. Curious, Brian moved toward the noise, which came from their bedroom. He settled above an old air conditioning vent Brenda had complained about before, which he hadn't removed after installing a new one. Peeking through the vent after shifting some insulation, Brian's heart sank as he saw Brenda with another man. Shocked and hurt, he couldn't look away. After a few minutes, he regained his composure, pulled out his phone, and discreetly recorded the scene through the vent. "Does your husband ever satisfy you, or is he lacking?" "I've asked you not to bring up Brian," Brenda objected, but Brian thought her protest sounded feeble. "This isn't about him. He's a good lover and a great father. I'm sure he is. Yet here I am, about to have closeness with you in his bed, and you claim to be content with him. Something doesn't add up." "I don't know why I let you convince me to do this here." Right there. We won't get caught at your place. I'm about to climax," moaned Brenda. The guy on top of Brenda suddenly tensed. They stayed still for a moment before Brian saw him roll off his wife. "See how thrilling it is when we take risks?" Brenda's lover remarked. "Having closeness in my place is good, but doing it in your marital bed takes it up a notch." Brian recognized Brenda's lover as Bill Grant, a driver at the delivery company where they both worked. He had recently gone through a divorce and had a daughter in Tim's class. "That sounds risky," Brenda replied, lacking any real emotion. "You wanted to have love in my bed just to outdo Brian? It's not some kind of competition. For men, it kinda is," Grant chuckled softly. "You're hot, but knowing you're married and I'm with you in your husband's bed makes me feel like I've won. It's a thrill. It wouldn't be so thrilling if Brian caught us. I shouldn't have agreed to this, and it won't happen again. I'm worried about Brian finding out." "It would ruin my marriage," Brenda confessed. "Let's make a deal," Grant proposed. "As long as you keep your husband in the dark, we won't do it in his bed. But once he's back in the game, we'll have to return so I can reclaim my top spot. I can't shut Brian out. He's my husband. I can't just stop having love with him," Brenda reasoned. "He's a man and wants regular bed life. I'll try to discourage him from wanting closeness and limit our rendezvous in my bedroom. I dread the thought of what would happen if Brian ever caught us." Brian had parked his truck in a separate garage, hidden from view. Brenda didn't know he was home, let alone that he was listening to her conversation. Coming down from the attic, Brian was reeling from discovering his wife's affair. He decided not to confront Brenda, choosing instead to focus on their son Tim, who was still in high school. Brenda's feelings no longer mattered to him. Determined not to let a cheater enjoy the house he had renovated for 15 years, Brian planned to stay until Tim graduated. He accelerated the renovation of his apartment over the garage, planning to turn it into a comfortable living space with a kitchen and bathroom, where he could stay until Tim went to college. Brian decided to prioritize Tim's college fund, and once secure, he would start rebuilding his own life, no longer tied by loyalty to Brenda. By the time Brenda got home and saw him in the kitchen, Brian was composed. "You're home early. Did something happen?" she asked. Observing her now, he noticed her aging and wondered why he hadn't seen these changes before. Realizing it was likely his love that had blinded him, he felt sad but knew it was her actions that had changed their relationship. "Yeah, things are a bit hectic at work. They've asked me to do some night shifts for a while, starting tonight. They let me come home to pack a lunch and rest. I'll head back in later," Brian explained. "They shouldn't make you work nights after a day shift, even with some time off during the day," reasoned Brenda. "You'll be exhausted. At least lie down and get some sleep for a few hours." "Good idea," Brian agreed. "I'll just go lie down between the sheets and—" "Wait!" Brenda interrupted loudly, remembering the condition of the bed. "I just realized I need to wash the bed linens." "Okay," Brian responded calmly, chuckling to himself at Brenda's discomfort. "I'll just use the bed in the guest room. No need to get worked up." Brian left home pretending to go to work, but instead watched a baseball game at a sports bar and later sneaked into his future apartment to sleep on an air mattress. The next day, he quickly hired a contractor ready to start work immediately. Brian's usual work schedule ran from Sunday to Thursday nights, leaving weekends off. Brenda was puzzled to see him set up to sleep in the guest room on a Friday, his usual night off. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room? Since we won't see much of each other during your night shifts, why not sleep in our bed?" asked Brenda, puzzled. "Since I worked last night and caught a few hours of sleep this morning while you were at work, I'm not very tired. I plan to watch a baseball game and maybe a movie after that," Brian explained, sticking to his prepared excuse. "I'm trying to adjust to staying awake at night and sleeping in the morning." "I don't want to disturb your sleep, unless you're up for some action," Brian suggested, wiggling his eyebrows suggestively. Brenda's response was just as Brian had anticipated. If he hadn't overheard her conversation with her lover, he might have missed her brief deer-in-the-headlights look before she weakly smiled. "I'm pretty tired tonight. Maybe we could just cuddle a bit and go to sleep," Brenda suggested. "Plus, Tim's home tonight. He might hear us." "Cuddling won't do it for me," Brian replied. "If closeness is off the table, I'll just sleep in the guest room to avoid temptation. You never worried about Tim hearing us before, so that's just an excuse. You don't need to make things up. I'm not the type to pressure a woman." "I know that, Brian. You're right. It was a weak excuse, and I'm sorry. I'm just tired and not feeling romantic." "I hope you understand," Brenda apologized. "I understand more than you think. Let me know when you're in the mood. If I'm feeling it too, we might connect." "Good night," Brian responded as he headed towards the guest room, leaving Brenda with a confused expression. Sunday night, he confidently began his new role as shift foreman without mentioning his promotion to Brenda due to her secrecy. His shift went smoothly with a welcoming team. By Monday morning, Brenda was at work, and construction had begun on his apartment. After a quick talk with the foreman, Brian managed to fall asleep, despite the noise and occasional phone calls. Annoyed at forgetting to silence the landline in the guest room, Brian answered the phone groggily. "Hello?" "Sorry for waking you up, Brian," said his mother-in-law, Beverly. "I just wanted to let you know that Bill and I heard about your night shifts and we'll make sure not to disturb you. If you need any help with Tim while you're sleeping, just give us a call." Brian ended the call without a word, shaking his head at people's obliviousness as he unplugged the phone. It took him a while, but he drifted back to sleep. The construction crew wrapped up their work in less than a week, leaving Brian impressed by their efficiency. Reflecting on how long it would have taken him to do the same job, he marveled at their speed. On Friday afternoon, he headed to a furniture store and ordered the essentials for his new space: a king-sized bed, a small kitchen table with 4 chairs, and a compact sofa. Then he visited an appliance store to pick out a large flat-screen TV, a fridge, an oven, and a microwave. By Monday afternoon, his bachelor pad, as he called it, would be all set for him to move in full-time. Brian chuckled at Brenda's puzzled expression when she returned home on Monday to find a crew working around their detached garage. She pulled him aside for an explanation. "I'm having them finish an apartment over the garage," Brian revealed. "I need a quiet space to sleep during the day without interruptions. It's going to be soundproofed and won't even have a landline. With me working nights, I figured it would be easier for everyone if I had my own space." "Not know you're around?" Brenda echoed in surprise. "But you're part of our family. We should know you're here." "I'll still be around for Tim's baseball practices and games, and we'll have dinner together," Brian assured her. "But I mentioned a few days ago about being available for some special time together. Are you asking me to fulfill that tonight?" "You're acting like a real a-hole. Marriage is about more than just closeness. We expect communication, romance, and sharing our thoughts and problems. It's not all about act, you know." "Don't lecture me on marriage," warned Brian. "I put effort into this marriage just like you do. This arrangement will work fine. Just let me know when you want me in bed." "I'm not some object to be serviced," snapped Brenda. "You won't be getting anything until you apologize sincerely, and I expect a nice dinner out as part of that apology, you a-hole." Brian grinned and walked away, leaving Brenda puzzled. While he was making it easy to keep Bill Grant away, Brenda was worried about Brian's behavior. He wasn't his usual self and seemed to be ignoring her, which concerned her. He had always been attentive before. Deciding to give Brian a memorable night once he apologized, Brenda was sure he wouldn't hold out much longer without closeness. She knew he wouldn't lose interest in it. He had always been eager for it since they met. By the next Wednesday, Brian had fully settled into his new apartment. With the upcoming Labor Day weekend, he had 3 nights off. Tim's junior year would begin the following Tuesday. "How would you both like to go to a Diamondbacks game this weekend?" Brian asked at dinner on Thursday. "They're playing the Dodgers, and it's a big series for them." "Seriously? That sounds awesome." "Thanks, Dad," Tim exclaimed. "I'm not a big fan of baseball," complained Brenda. "I'll pass on the game and find something to do at home." "I bet you will," muttered Brian, just loud enough for Brenda to hear. "It's settled then. Tim and I will go to the Saturday night game." "Wow, I gotta tell Scooter about this," exclaimed Tim. "He'll be so jealous. He's a huge Dodger fan and used to live in L.A. "Why not invite him to come along?" suggested Brian. "Watching baseball with friends, especially fellow fans, makes it more fun." "I'll call him right now. Thanks, Dad," said Tim eagerly as he dashed off to grab his phone. "You really made Tim's day," observed Brenda. "Baseball's a great way for you to bond with the boys. Horace seems like a nice kid." "Wait, his real name's Horace?" Brian asked incredulously. "No wonder he goes by Scooter. Who names their kid Horace unless they're trying to torture him?" "Tim mentioned that Horace's dad passed away from a brain aneurysm 2 years ago," Brenda explained, brushing off Brian's comment about the name. "They moved here this summer to be closer to his grandparents who aren't doing well." "I'll stick with calling him Scooter and forget I ever heard Horace," Brian declared, just as Tim rushed back into the room. "Scooter's mom said he can come," Tim announced excitedly. "This is going to be awesome." On Saturday afternoon, Tim parked his truck outside a nice ranch house in a good neighborhood. Before he could even come to a stop, Scooter bolted out the door and hopped into the truck next to Tim. "Hey, Mr. Welker, my mom wants to meet you before we go," Scooter explained. "I guess she wants to make sure you're not an offensive person or something. Sorry about that." "No worries," Brian said, as he got out of the truck and walked up to the door, then rang the bell. A slender woman around Brian's age opened the door. Brian noticed her legs, which he thought were her best feature. They looked strong and well-shaped running shorts. He couldn't help but admire them. Her stomach was flat, and her top barely separated from her torso. "Do you think my legs look good compared to everything else?" Scooter's mom asked, teasing Brian. "Yeah, they look great," Brian agreed, catching her playful grin. "You've got some nice legs. Do you think I should let my son go to a baseball game with a guy who checks out every woman he sees?" Scooter's mom challenged, trying to teach her son manners. Seeing the humor in her eyes, Brian knew she was teasing him. He decided to go along with it. "What you're really asking is if you should let your son go anywhere with a guy, since checking out women is part of being a guy," Brian joked with a grin. "He needs to learn to appreciate women. I'll teach him what to look for." "I hope you'll be more subtle during these lessons," the woman replied, still smiling. "The first lesson will be to smack anyone who calls him Horace, except you, of course," Brian joked back. "I see. So my son will learn to be assertive and appreciate women's legs," she remarked. "Not just that," Brian replied. "I'll teach him how to judge discreetly and appreciate all aspects of women, not just one." "Great, thanks," Scooter's mom said, earning more respect from Brian. "Have a good time, and if you're running late, make sure Scooter gives me a call. By the way, my name's Gertrude." "Seriously? Gertrude? What do your friends call you?" Brian asked. "For my guy friends, I go by Minx, Raven, Candy, or Bubbles. My girlfriends call me Gertrude," she replied with a straight face. "Sounds good to me. I'm Brian. Since we're going to be friends, I'll call you Minx." "I kind of like that name," Brian said. "Why am I not surprised?" Gertrude chuckled before laughing heartily. "Horace can go with you anytime. I love your sense of humor. Tim is very polite, so I knew his parents would be fine." "Thanks for inviting him to the game. We're big baseball fans. I used to go to as many Dodgers home games as I could. My dad even played in the minor leagues before I was born. He was pretty good, just not quite good enough," Gertrude added. "Scooter's a great kid, so it's no problem. I'll keep an eye on him and make sure he gets back home in one piece, Minx. Have a nice day." "Are you serious about calling me Minx?" "I was joking," Gertrude protested. "You'll always be Minx to me," Brian replied quickly as he walked back to the truck. Brian had a relaxing day at the game. Scooter caught a foul ball, and both boys ate too many hot dogs and drank too much soda. They fell asleep in the back seat of the truck before Brian could leave the parking lot. When they reached Scooter's home, Brian gently woke the sleepy teen and walked him to the front door, where Gertrude was waiting with a smile. "He might have had a bit too much food and soda," Brian admitted. "Of course he did. It's all part of a ball game," Gertrude replied. "Thanks for taking him and bringing him back safely." "It was my pleasure. Scooter's a great kid, Minx," Brian said. "I'll see you at the boys' games." Brian found a routine that suited him well. He'd come home, grab a quick breakfast, and then snooze from 9 to 3. Thanks to extra insulation and blackout curtains, his sleep was usually deep and undisturbed. Brenda often complained about Brian napping in his man cave during weekends, but she'd stop if he helped around the house. Brian sensed her worry about being caught by Grant in their bedroom, which suggested she wasn't considering divorce, aligning with his plan to stay married until Tim graduated. Brian's new foreman role was easier physically, so he bought a home gym and kept up with regular workouts. He attended all of Tim's baseball practices, eventually coaching some kids too. Scooter, initially timid but talented, flourished with Brian's extra coaching, becoming a key player by mid-season. Tim also excelled, making Brian proud. Brian noticed some moms at the games appreciated his involvement, laughing at his jokes and bringing treats, which included some for him. As Tim and Scooter's friendship grew, Brian found himself spending more time with Scooter's mom, Gertrude, who was witty and sharp. He considered discussing something personal with her. "I hope I'm not out of line here, Minx, but I've got to ask you something," Brian began. "Almost a B cup," Gertrude responded quickly. "What? I'm lost," Brian admitted. "Well, when a guy says he's got a personal question, isn't it usually about a woman's bra size?" Gertrude replied with a chuckle. "Yeah, usually," Brian chuckled back. "But in this case, I wanted to know if you've noticed some of the moms treating me differently lately. Do you think they've been friendlier?" "Wow, you're quite the observer," Gertrude retorted. "You really don't know what's happening, huh?" "I'd need more details on the what before I could answer that," Brian pondered. "I get baseball rules, like the infield fly rule, but I don't think you're talking about that, are you?" "Nope, I was referring to the unwritten rule of not bunting or stealing bases with a big lead," Gertrude quipped before getting serious. "If you'd been paying attention, you'd notice the friendliest moms are the single ones. You're a great dad, good looking, and have a decent job. That makes you a catch in their eyes," Gertrude reasoned. "What about me being married? Wouldn't that matter?" Brian asked. "They've thought about it," Gertrude replied. "That's why they haven't tried to seduce you. No one's made a move, right?" "No one's tried, not that it would be a problem," Brian replied. "I'm married, so I'm obviously not a catch for anyone. Brian, I hate that I'm the one breaking this to you, but we're pals, so it's on me. All the moms know your wife's stepping out on you. But it gets worse. Word is she's cutting you off in the bedroom. You two aren't sharing a bed, and it's pretty clear you're headed for a breakup soon. These ladies want to scoop you up for their team once you're single." Gertrude's bombshell left Brian reeling. How did everyone know his private life? Who could be privy to his bedroom details? Then it hit him. Brenda must have spilled the beans to that jerk about us not sleeping together, and he blabbed, Brian fumed. "Are you talking about your wife or her beau?" Gertrude asked, trying to lighten the mood. "You seem oddly calm about all this gossip. Did you suspect Brenda was cheating?" "No, I never saw it coming," Brian replied. "You had no inkling at all?" Gertrude asked incredulously. "I knew she was cheating, but I never suspected it," Brian clarified. "I'm lost. How can you know without suspecting?" Gertrude puzzled. "It's simple. I went from clueless to certain when I caught Grant in bed with Brenda. I skipped suspicion altogether," Brian explained. "Well, that's a twist. You caught them in the act, yet you're still hitched and not in jail. You're not into open relationships, are you? Or some voyeur?" Gertrude pressed, concerned. "No way. That's not me," Brian assured her. "I decided to change priorities. Spending quality time with Tim, being a full-time dad became my focus. Living with Brenda, rather than splitting up, seemed best to achieve that. I started working nights, which put a damper on our bed life. I built a sweet apartment over the garage so I could sleep during the day without hassle." She wasn't thrilled with the sleeping setup, but Grant made it clear that every time she slept with me, he'd demand to use our bed for their trysts. It bothered her, but not enough to stop seeing him. She's convinced her affair's a secret and wants to keep it that way. I didn't tell her, but I won't be close with her anymore. I got tested for STDs and I'm clean. I aim to keep it that way. "Seriously? You heard that?" Gertrude seethed. "How could she treat you so poorly? And that guy's a total jerk. All the single moms think you'd be a real catch." "I think you're overestimating my appeal. I've never been the heartthrob type. But having a solid job might make me more attractive to some desperate women," Brian suggested. "Are you kidding? Look at you. You're handsome, with a beautiful smile," Gertrude pointed out. "You're strong, kind, smart, and great with kids. If I weren't so plain and flat-chested, I might have made a move along with my barely there A-cup. I think I better stop talking." "Thanks for being straight with me about what folks are saying and thinking," Brian responded, a bit somber. "I didn't realize everyone knew about my situation. It's embarrassing. Can't even keep my own wife happy. I feel like a total wimp. You're a good guy who wants to be a good dad to his son. You're tough enough to handle this crap so you can have a solid bond with Tim. And Horace thinks you're pretty cool," Gertrude assured. "Who?" Brian asked. You must be feeling better if you're teasing me about Horace's name, Gertrude noted with a grin. Minx, you're a great friend. You've kept me from sinking too deep into my own misery. I just hope Tim doesn't catch wind of this, Brian confessed. That ship has either sailed or is getting damn close, Gertrude disclosed. Horace says Tim knows things aren't right at home. You're mostly avoiding his mom. He's bound to pick up on something when so many people are in the know. You know what's on my mind? Gertrude chimed in. Horace has a crush on Heather Grant. It's awkward for both him and me. She's a good girl, clueless about what a jerk her dad is. I'm just relieved Tim's not chasing after Heather, Brian commented. That'd be a mess. I'll take what I can get. Horace says Tim's eyeing Holly Ingram, which isn't surprising. She's at every game cheering him on, Gertrude said with a grin. Yeah, I've seen her around. Nice kid. I knew her family growing up, Brian recalled. They're good people. 2 nights later, Tim's team played in the district championships. Brian realized he was more nervous than Tim. It didn't help that 3 single moms were vying for his attention. Norma Wilson wore a revealing top, flaunting her ample cleavage. She kept leaning over in front of Brian, catching his eye. Brandy Dorn, in a tight sweater, asked Brian about the team, her curves accentuated. Jillian Patterson was less subtle, pressing her chest against Brian's arm. Gertrude smirked knowingly as she handed him snacks. Brian noticed the 3 women suddenly leave, then heard a familiar voice behind him. I figured I'd join my husband this afternoon to watch our son play. Didn't expect to have to navigate through so many fans to get to him, Brenda remarked a bit loudly. What's happening here, Brian? The game hasn't started yet, but Tim seems solid in batting practice, Brian replied, trying to change the subject. Nice try, Brenda retorted. Why were those women swarming around you like bees to honey? Good thing you're not allergic to silicone. If you're asking me to decipher the female mind, I'm clueless, Brian admitted. I'm even surprised to see you here. My son's in a big game. I'm here to support him. Obviously, other moms are here too. Seems like some of them are more interested in you than in the game, Brenda replied. You've been busy lately, not making it to the games, Brian observed. How'd you manage to break free today? Brenda glanced at Brian, wondering if he was implying something with his mention of her obligations. But she quickly dismissed the thought. If he suspected anything, he'd confront her more aggressively. Brian wouldn't just let her cheating slide. If he knew, he'd make it known. I made time. Tim's game is important, so it's important to me. Haven't seen much of you since you started the night shift, so I thought it'd be nice to spend some time together cheering for Tim, Brenda explained. As Brenda settled into the bleachers for her first game, she noticed unfriendly stares from some of the other moms, puzzled since she hadn't met them before. She then saw Gertrude, looking casual yet striking with her styled hair and shorts. The game started, and Brian was fixated on the field. Tim was up to bat and hit a double, followed by Scooter, who looked stronger than last season. Scooter's hit sent the ball flying over the fence, sparking cheers as he and Tim rounded the bases. Gertrude beamed with pride for her son, while Brian, touched by the boys' success, had tears in his eyes, reflecting the hard work he'd put into coaching them. After the game, Brenda drove to the pizza place where the team was celebrating. Finding parking a distance away, she walked in to see Brian surrounded by Norma Wilson and Brandy Dorn, who were a bit too close for comfort. As Brenda approached, they quickly stepped back. This scene reminded her of a recent conversation with her lover, Bill Grant. Isn't it time we used your bed again? Bill had suggested, as Brenda was getting dressed after a romp. Getting it on in your husband's bed really gets me going. But you promised not to until Brian and I did it, Brenda reminded him. I don't want to take the risk. Wait, are you saying you two haven't done it since we last hooked up? Bill asked incredulously. You said you'd keep him on hold until he made a move. He's been on night shifts since then, sleeping in the garage room. You haven't even had a hug since. That's ridiculous, Bill scoffed. He's too young and you're too attractive for him to lose interest. Is he not straight or seeing someone else? He's definitely not gay, Brenda insisted. He's very masculine and loyal. He's just tired from working nights and only joins us for dinner. Weekends, he's busy with yard work and stuff. Grant asserted, any regular guy married to someone as attractive as you wouldn't willingly go without, even with long work hours. He must be messing around. That should make it easier for us to hook up. He's getting his, and I'm getting what used to be his. Brian would never cheat on me, Brenda declared firmly. He takes our marriage vows seriously. He's not the type to sneak around and have some cheap affair. Is that what you're doing? Bill demanded. Well, not exactly. This is just temporary. He's been busy with work and Tim's baseball, so he hasn't been paying much attention to me. I deserve a little fun. I work hard managing the house, cooking meals, and holding down a full-time job, Brenda reasoned. We know this won't last. Bill grinned as he pondered Brenda's explanation. I guess you're right. Let's enjoy it while it lasts. Give me a day when I can have you in your bed. It still turns me on. As Brenda remembered Bill's words, she grew concerned watching the two women flirting with Brian slink away. It was clear he had some attractive women interested in him. She realized she needed to protect her marriage from those women's advances. Then she spotted Gertrude sitting alone. Brenda quickly devised a plan. She put on a friendly smile and sat down beside a surprised Gertrude. It's nice to see you, Gertrude. Horace has become quite the ball player, and he's such a nice kid. You must be proud of him. I am, Gertrude admitted cautiously. Tim is doing great too. Brian's time with them is paying off. He's been a wonderful mentor to Horace. Yeah, sometimes Brian is just too nice, Brenda remarked, seizing the opportunity to make her request. You've probably noticed how those blondes are always hanging around him. I was thinking maybe you could help me out. I know Brian wouldn't stray under normal circumstances, but he's a man, and those women practically throw themselves at him, Brenda explained. How do you think you could help me? Should I spray them with cold water when they get too close? Gertrude joked. I can't make it to most of the games and practices because of work and other commitments, Brenda began carefully. But I trust Brian with you. You're not his type at all. If you could just stick by him when I'm not there, I'd really appreciate it. I'm planning to suggest to Brian that he should stay closer to you and act more attentive, Brenda continued. Those women might back off if they think he's settled on you. I know it might be awkward for you, but it's for a good cause. You could help save our marriage. Let me make sure I understand this, Gertrude replied, incredulous. You're worried that these attractive single mothers might tempt Brian, so you want me to fill in for you at ball games and practices? You think I'm a safe choice because I'm not as flashy? I didn't mean to imply you're dull. I just know Brian. He's less likely to be swayed by you than by some busty ex-cheerleader type, Brenda clarified. You'd be helping him stay faithful. Do you think cheating is unforgivable? Gertrude pondered. Would it be so bad if he fooled around a bit as long as you were still his priority? I hope you're kidding, Brenda replied. I adore my husband, but cheating is a total deal breaker for me. It shatters the marriage contract. I can't accept unfaithfulness. To me, that would mean the end of our marriage. You know how strongly I feel about this. You were married for years. I value loyalty and faithfulness. It's logical that cheating violates the marriage agreement, Gertrude admitted. I agree with you on that. I need to go over to Brian. Can I count on you to keep a close eye on him when I'm not around? Brenda inquired. Absolutely, Gertrude answered with a smile. Make sure you explain everything to Brian. I'll do my part. Who better to keep a good man faithful than a modest, plain, unexciting woman? I might not have put it quite like that, but you summed it up pretty well. Thanks again, Brenda said as she left to join her husband. Last night, Brenda had a serious talk with me before I headed to work, Brian started at the next day's practice. The main point was she's concerned about the many attractive single moms around me. She thinks I'd be safer if I stuck close to you, Minx, or as she likes to call you, Gertrude. Somehow, that doesn't exactly make me feel secure. You're a clever guy. You know you're never going to be completely safe around a single woman, regardless of her top size or appearance, Gertrude joked. Minx, you're one of the most beautiful women I've ever known, Brian replied sincerely. You've got it all, not just artificial enhancements. Whoa! You're really making my job tougher, blushed Gertrude. I might need to book you an eye exam after the baseball season wraps up. I've got 20 vision, and I'm usually spot on in judging people except for one big mistake, Brian noted. Seems like I've underestimated my own wife. I reckon she might have underestimated us too, Minx chimed in. That's if you genuinely find me appealing. Brian found amusement in the reaction of the single moms as Minx stuck close to him. They spent a good chunk of time chatting and joking together. The moms seemed surprised, then let down. It didn't take long for Minx to stand out from the crowd. The team had a long drive to Middleburg for their next game, so they decided to head out the day before and stay overnight at a hotel. They hoped it would help the boys stay fresh for the game. Brian gave rides to Jake Winston's folks and Minx. They talked about the team's chances on the way, filled with optimism. When they arrived, they found themselves right behind the team bus. Brian helped Ralph Winston with his luggage. Some parents, like the Winstons, volunteered to chaperone the boys and would stay at the same hotel. Others had to book elsewhere due to the busy town with multiple games. Before Tim boarded the bus, Brian told him he'd be at a different hotel, and reminded him to behave for the coaches and chaperones. "What hotel are you staying at, Minx?" Brian asked as they approached the team hotel. "The same one as you," she answered simply. "But I never mentioned which hotel I booked. How'd you find out?" Brian asked, puzzled. "I didn't," Minx replied succinctly. "How'd you know we're staying at the same hotel? It's pretty crowded this weekend." "You might have trouble finding a room last minute," Brian observed. "I'm sure something will work out," Gertrude replied with a wide grin, leaving Brian puzzled. A few minutes later, Brian arrived at his hotel and suggested to Gertrude, "Minx, want to see if you can snag a room while I check in? I can hang around to make sure you find something." "Thanks, but I'll just wait here. I'll be fine," she insisted. As Brian checked in and got his room keys, he returned to his truck to find Minx waiting. "Would you like one of these cards to my room?" he offered. "It's room 207. "What a sweet gesture," Minx exclaimed as she accepted the key and kissed Brian on the cheek. "Let's hit the hay. It's going to be a long night." The next morning, Brian felt more tired than when he hit the sack. Initially, he struggled with breaking his marriage vows, but Minx helped him see it differently. "Let's think this through. Brenda not only cheated, but she's cut you off. Even if she hadn't, she's risking your health with unprotected act. Basically, she's made being close with her unsafe and unappealing. She's released you from your vows and marriage contract. I've been celibate for over 2 years. I'm clean after regular checkups. You got tested after finding out she cheated, and you're clean. I even started birth control over a month ago, hoping we could be together. Can you give me one reason we shouldn't be together? Is it my looks? Your wife figured I was a good fit against all those busty women because she knew you wouldn't be into me. Am I just not attractive enough?" "Minx, you're incredibly attractive. Don't doubt that for a second. I've never strayed from Brenda, and it's a mental shift, but you've made a solid case for us being together. I'm all in," Brian declared with a grin. "Before we go any further, there's something you should know," Minx responded. "Both my parents are in hospice care and likely won't be around much longer. My brother's been sending game tapes of Horace to his friend who happens to be the baseball coach at a top prep school in LA. If Horace gets a baseball scholarship next year, we might move back there. I really like you, but we're not talking about a long-term thing here. It just wouldn't work out. Look at us. You're a good-looking married guy with a cheating spouse. I'm just a regular woman with a son who might have a shot at a sports scholarship. I have to do what's best for Horace," she explained. "That's fantastic news about Scooter," Brian said proudly. "He's a great kid and a talented player. I'm happy he'll have a chance to improve his game against tough competition and get a good education. You're a big part of why he's getting attention from better schools. I've seen the effort you've put in with him. It's funny how you being a mentor to my son is giving us the chance to move back to LA and away from you." "I'm not sure I'd be good at a one-night stand kind of thing," Brian admitted. "Maybe it's better to just skip closeness altogether than have a one-night fling and go back to celibacy." "You're being silly. I mentioned we might move back to LA in 6 months for the school year. That's a long time away. A guy could have plenty of fun in 6 months unless he's too old for a regular dose of steamy action with a very eager woman. We'll just have to see about that. Will you live up to your nickname, Minx?" Brian teased. "I'll do my best for you, big boy," Minx promised. "Whenever you want me, just whistle and I'll teach you how to whistle." "I've always been told I'm a pretty good whistler," Brian joked. "Then you're definitely not doing it right," Gertrude shot back. The baseball team ended up winning the state championship, and Scooter got a scholarship to a top California prep school. Sadly, both of Gertrude's parents passed away before Thanksgiving, within a week of each other. Brian and Tim attended their funerals, where Brian got to meet Gertrude's brother, Dexter, and immediately hit it off with him. "Brian, this is my brother Dexter," Gertrude introduced. "Dexter, meet Brian, who's been a mentor to Horace and a good friend to us." "Wow," exclaimed Brian. "Your name's Dexter?" "That's right," agreed Gertrude's brother. "But everyone else calls me Grim. Only Gertrude and our parents ever call me Dexter, so what do you call my sister?" "I call her Minx, but it's a long story," Brian said. "I don't think I need to ask," Grim chuckled. Brian spent Thanksgiving with Brenda and Tim at her parents' place. For the first time in a while, Brian found himself getting ready for bed with Brenda. They always stayed over on Thanksgiving night, and Brian couldn't come up with a good reason to break that tradition. "It's been ages since we've been together," Brenda murmured. "You must be in need of some affection by now. Make love to me." Brian felt a pang of guilt at his next words. "So, you're finally admitting you need some attention? I knew you'd come around. I'll be happy to take care of you and put a smile on your face for the holiday." You heartless jerk. With that attitude, you won't be getting any action for a long time, Brenda snapped. What's gotten into you? Just forget about touching me. Fine, Brian replied simply as he turned away from Brenda. It wasn't like him to say something so harsh, but it did the job of avoiding closeness with Brenda. Still, Brian couldn't shake the regret over how far his marriage had fallen. Brenda felt uneasy after Brian's sharp remark, which made it hard for her to fall asleep. As she lay beside him, she pondered whether he was upset because they hadn't been intimate lately, or if he somehow knew about her affair. She realized she needed to have a serious conversation with Bill. She couldn't keep denying Brian closeness, especially after her slip-up about having acted with him in their marital bed, which could raise suspicions and harm their marriage. Brian had a set routine for his night shift. He'd come home, grab a light breakfast, and hit the bed by 9 a.m. Often, he'd wake up around 2 p.m. to find Minx joining him in bed. They'd spend an hour together before she'd head home to be there when Scooter got back from school. With baseball season over, Brian could focus on being fresh and ready when Tim returned from school, after which he'd usually catch a quick nap before heading to work. Overall, the arrangement worked well for both Brian and Minx. One evening in early December, Tim called his dad, Brian, shortly after starting his shift at work. Dad, Scooter and I are hanging out with Heather and Holly in Heather's car. You said we could stay out until midnight since there's no school tomorrow. We've hit a snag. Heather was driving her mom's car, and we've got a flat tire with no spare in the trunk. We're stuck on D Street, and I'm getting a bit worried. I see a few guys by the arcade looking over this way. You're stranded on D Street by the arcade? Dang it, cursed Brian. We'll talk about this later. Is Heather driving that Corolla? Yeah, it's a 2017 Corolla, Tim replied quickly. I'll grab a wheel and tire that fits and head over. Keep your doors locked and call the cops if you run into trouble. Take care of those girls. Brian put his phone away and headed to the production floor. He spotted Gus, who drove a Corolla. Gus, you still have that Corolla, right? Brian asked the bearded man operating a forklift. I need a tire that fits your car, and I need it now. While talking to Gus, Brian saw Jack Reynolds passing by. Jack was Holly's uncle, and his sister was Holly's mother. Jack, my son and some friends are stuck on D Street with a flat tire and no spare. Holly's with them. I'm getting a tire from Gus and heading over. Could you come with us? I've got a proper spare, not one of those flimsy donuts, Gus said firmly. Let's take my car and get there fast. With Jack, Gus, and Brian on their way, they were worried about the kids being in that part of town late at night. It wasn't a safe area, especially for teenage girls. Brenda lay in bed, feeling the warmth from her time with Bill. His phone rang and he saw it was Heather calling. Ah, dang it, it's Heather. I gotta pick it up or she'll keep bugging me, Bill said, checking the caller ID. Brenda only caught Bill's side of the conversation, but was curious about what she heard. Why are you all down there? Well, that's unfortunate. Those boys should be able to handle a small problem like that. Call AAA. It's not my fault your mom doesn't keep a spare tire. What was that about? Brenda asked once Bill hung up. Nothing to fret over, Bill replied, reaching over to touch Brenda's chest. Heather's got a flat, but she's getting help from AAA. As Brian and his pals pulled up behind Heather's car, they spotted some tough-looking guys nearby. Brian got out, grabbed the tools from Gus's trunk, and Gus brought the spare tire. Jack signaled Heather to lower her window. You guys stay put till we fix the tire. If those jerks cause any trouble, we'll handle it. And Holly, you'll need to explain to your mom why you're here on D Street, Jack said. Brian positioned the jack under the flat tire, cranking it tight, then moved to loosen the lug nuts. The leader of the tough guys approached Jack, claiming it was their turf. Before Jack could respond, Brian swung the tire iron, hitting the guy's shins. He dropped to his knees, cursing, while Brian sat on him to keep loosening the nuts. The two closest gang members hurried over, looking like they wanted to help their fallen leader. Jack swiftly hit the first one in the head, knocking him down instantly. Gus moved forward, causing the second guy to retreat out of his reach. Raise the car a bit, and I'll take off this tire, Brian told Jack calmly. Jack cranked up the car while the gang members shouted insults and curses. Occasionally, the guy under Brian would try to move, but Brian would grab his hair, lift his head slightly, and push it back down onto the ground. After 2 tries, the guy decided to stay put. Brian removed the lug nuts and took off the flat tire. Gus handed him the good tire, and he put it on. After hand-tightening all the nuts, Jack lowered the car. They seemed to ignore the taunts from the toughs as they worked. Brian tightened the nuts and stood up, accidentally kicking the leader in the groin as he stepped over him. You guys got something to say? Brian asked as he walked toward the gang, twirling the tire iron casually. As he approached, the group scattered. Get out of here, you kids! Jack shouted, backing the gang away from the car. "Watch out, you don't run over those fools lying in the street and stay away from this area." The three men got back into Gus's car and followed Heather's car as she drove towards the kids' neighborhood. "I can't believe you whacked that fool in the shins," Gus chuckled. "He went down like a ton of bricks." "Thanks for coming along," Jack said. "My hand hurts, but it felt good to knock that punk on the head." "Geez, you really sat on that guy while fixing the tire," laughed Gus. "That was a blast to watch." The men continued to laugh and talk about their adventure as they went back to work. By morning, the whole plant had heard the story. Stories of bravery and excitement were always a hit, especially during the night shift. They helped pass the time and took everyone's minds off their tiredness. The next afternoon, Brian woke up to Minx jumping into bed and kissing him passionately. She was without clothes and clearly excited.
"Horace filled me in on what happened last night. You were amazing. Thanks for looking out for the kids like that," gushed Minx. "You're in for a treat. I would have come sooner, but I had to wait for Horace and Tim to go see the girls, since they're off school today."
Meanwhile, Brenda had just started her shift when Sue Blaine approached her at the water cooler, looking like she had something to say.
"I heard about how Brian, Jack Reynolds, and Gus Benson handled those troublemakers by the kids' car on D Street. A good whack with a tire iron puts those punks in their place pretty quick," Sue said. Brenda quickly connected the dots. Last night, Heather had called her dad for help, and he had brushed her off. Apparently, the situation was more serious than Bill had let on. Since Sue mentioned kids, it likely involved Holly, along with Horace and Brenda's son, Tim. "I'm interested in what you heard," Brenda replied. "I want to see if the rumors match up."
As Sue recounted the rumors, Brenda grew angry with Bill Grant, though she didn't show it to Sue. His daughter had reached out to him in a dangerous situation, and he had ignored her. Brian, along with Gus and Holly's Uncle Jack, had stepped up like real men. They protected the kids and got them out of harm's way. Discovering that she was involved with a man who wouldn't assist his own daughter and her friends, including Tim, deeply hurt her. She wondered how far she had fallen. Brian's character outshone Bill's by tenfold. Brenda had always known this, which made her question why she got involved with such a selfish guy. In the break room that afternoon, Brenda found Bill alone, snacking while his delivery truck was getting fixed. She didn't hold back. "Heather reached out for your help last night, and you brushed her off. Those kids could have been in real trouble, and you just said to call AAA. What kind of dad does that?" "It turned out fine," Bill said casually. "Your husband and his pals sorted it, so what's the issue?"
"Brian acted like a real man. You abandoned your own daughter. That's the problem. My son was with them."
"If your lame husband is so great, why am I the one getting close to you while he's been out of luck for months?" Bill chuckled.
"But no matter how he tries, he can't measure up to me."
"You a hole. Being a man isn't about size," Brenda retorted.
"He's more of a man than you'll ever be."
"You say that, but last night you had love with me. In my view, I've outdone that wimp in every way that counts," responded Bill casually, as he took another sip of his soda.
"That's it,"
declared Brenda firmly.
"We're done. Don't even try to talk to me again. I want no part of you."
"Whatever," Bill responded calmly. "Plenty of married women out there would love a guy like me. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. I'd still be willing to be intimate with you if you ask nicely." Brenda burst into tears and hurried out of the room. She had cheated on her husband, disrespected him, and jeopardized her marriage and family for a shallow, self-centered person. She only hoped Brian would never find out how foolish she had been. With that realization, she knew she had a lot of amends to make. Minx had just brought Brian to a satisfying finish when she heard sniffles behind her. Surprised, Minx turned around to see Brenda watching her, tears streaming down her face.
"How could you do this to me?" sobbed Brenda. "I trusted you both, and now this?"
"I'm just following your orders," Minx replied calmly, slipping on her clothes after silencing Brian with a gesture. "You wanted me to keep those busty blondes away from Brian? I sacrificed myself to meet your goals."
"I didn't want you to sleep with him, and you know it,"
Brenda shot back, her tears turning into anger.
"I can't believe Brian would cheat on me like this, especially with some skinny girl."
"I understand it's tough to hear that Brian and I are intimate, but there's no need to be rude," Minx reasoned. "Your husband was ready to burst. I'm just helping him release the tension he's been feeling."
"Bill Grant didn't want you to have closeness with your husband, so Brian had to turn to someone else. Luckily, I was there at the right time. You should be grateful I've helped you cut off Brian completely and kept Bill satisfied."
"Speaking of Bill, where is he? Is he with you in bed?" "You know about Bill?
Brenda exclaimed. Well, yeah, Minx replied. I think almost everyone knows about Bill. You've been seeing him for months. He promised to do it with you in your own bed every time you slept with Brian, so you stopped being close with your husband. Luckily, Bill filled that gap, pun intended. If Brian knew, why didn't he say anything? Why did he let Bill and me continue for so long? Brenda asked, tears still flowing down her cheeks. You're sharp. What do most guys do when they find out their wife's been cheating? He'd probably get real mad and yell at me. Then he'd likely divorce me, Brenda said as she faced the harsh truth. That sounds about right. So what happens next? Would Brian and Tim stick around while you move in with Bill? Minx asked calmly. I'm not leaving my home. Tim stays with me. If Brian wants out, he's the one who has to go. He'd have to pay alimony and child support, Brenda concluded firmly. That's pretty much what Brian figured would go down. He wanted to stay close to Tim and be the best dad he could. How could he make that happen? Minx probed. By not splitting up, Brenda murmured. He stuck around for Tim, not for me. When he found out about Bill and me, he mentally checked out of our marriage. We've been living like we're divorced for ages, haven't we? I was just too blind to see it. In your defense, you had Bill clouding your vision, making it hard to see your husband had already left emotionally. I'm just the girl who came along after you messed everything up. I helped Brian heal, Minx explained. I broke it off with Bill. I never want to see him again, Brenda declared. That was after he ditched his daughter in a tight spot last night, right? You didn't have much choice, Minx remarked. Even cheaters have their limits. Are you and Brian moving in together now? Brenda asked, wiping away her tears. We're pretty comfortable with things as they are. Horace and I are heading back to LA before school starts. I'd rather he doesn't find out his mom's dating his best friend's dad if I can help it. When it's time for me to leave, I might help Brian find someone new, if he wants, Minx revealed. You see, I didn't steal your man like those other moms wanted. We're just spending time together for now. Kind of like you and that jerk were. What if I put a stop to this? He's my husband. You can't sleep with him, Brenda protested. You gave me that right when you got with Bill Grant, Minx retorted. That pretty much freed Brian from any obligations to you. He and I are committed to each other. We trust each other, believe it or not. Brian's been told he can't be with you or anyone else if he wants to be with me, Minx added. Who knows who else Bill Grant's been with, or what diseases he might have. You could have all kinds of nasty stuff in there. Brenda cried again, thinking about Minx's words. Could Bill have been cheating with someone else? Brenda knew what kind of man Bill was now. She needed to get tested soon. So, what now? Brenda asked nervously. Let's keep things as they are. I'll keep visiting Brian and you keep avoiding him. It's working fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, Minx replied. I won't do that, Brenda said firmly. You're leaving soon. I'll stick around and show Brian what a great wife I can be. He won't need you. Except he knows I'm faithful while you're out there, ready for anyone, Minx argued. Basically, I control your bed life, at least with Brian. I won't let him near your dirty business while he's with me. I won't risk diseases, and he's not into it either. One thing I've learned, albeit too late, is there's more to a relationship than just act, Brenda said with false confidence. Act without love or commitment is pretty demeaning. I'll do what a wife should do for her husband, while you just give him closeness. Think about that. All right, Minx responded. Let's do it. You cook for him, clean the house, and do his laundry. I'll take care of him in bed. We'll see who's happier. Brian, I'm so sorry for disrespecting you. Can you forgive me? Brenda pleaded. How could he trust you again? Minx interjected. He might forgive you someday, but regaining his trust? That's the real challenge for cheaters. Enjoy the next few months while you're still his wife in name. Realize what you lost for some stranger and learn from it, Minx advised. Brian doesn't want to break up the family while Tim's in school. You've got about 9 months after I leave to try to win him back. Once Tim graduates, Brian might kick you to the curb. Why are you speaking for Brian? Brenda demanded. I'm not just his lover, I'm his best friend, Minx explained. While you were with Bill, Brian and I had our own talks. I promised to handle this situation when it came up. He promised to reward me once I did. Can you leave us alone now?